So, but yeah, don't just be ruthless with yourself all the time. That's not going to work either.
Also, don't just fart all the time.
Don't just fart all the time.
You have to sometimes. Don't do it all the time.
Sometimes, yes. But all the time, no. Morning, Jim.
Morning, Andrew. Good morning, Andrew Douglas. Andrew Douglas, good morning.
How's it going?
I'm feeling pretty good. Feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. This is one of my favorite topics we got coming up today.
That's good. I feel like I need to know how to do it well because sometimes I think that I might actually use looking at new material as an excuse to not focus on something, almost like an escape. So I wonder, I bet there's a good way to do this, but I wonder if I've done it in a bad way sometimes.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, this is one of the commandments I get the most pushback on.
Interesting.
And the reason you get so much pushback on it is because people don't want, they're kind of afraid to do it maybe or something. But like, this is the one, man. This is one of the biggest separators between bagpipers who are good and bagpipers who are, they're really nice people.
They're really nice. Bless their souls.
Yeah. But this is like one of the biggest things. And one of the things that struck me about this when I first started catching on was just that, like, oh yeah, obviously, this is how I do everything else that I've been successful with. So it should apply to this as well. And for me, it was working out, which, by the way, it's pretty ironic for me to be talking about working out right now.
We all go through phases, Andrew.
I'm pretty pudgy here after the holiday season, 2024. But for me, it was working out. And when I joined the CrossFit gym, one of the biggest things, it's right there in like the first sentence that they say about CrossFit. It's that it's constantly varied exercise. So we're not doing leg day on Monday and then doing chest and triceps on Tuesday and back and biceps on Wednesday and then repeat that twice a week with one day off each week. That's not how you're going to get fit and healthy. And of course, I'm sure there are experts out there far fitter than me who have been successful with that method. So I'm not trying to start any internet fires there. But of course, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, we're not really interested in being able to do one thing really well, right? And I suppose maybe some people disagree. Maybe some people would be perfectly happy just playing a really good Amazing Grace. But the irony of that, of only ever working on Amazing Grace, is that you're not going to get that great at Amazing Grace, and that people who are generally musically developed across a broad spectrum of all different types of music, those are the ones who are going to play the best Amazing Grace. I remember one time at Seattle Games, we were playing like the Tattoo or something, and it was back in the SFU days. And I remember Stuart Little was playing Amazing Grace, and he struck up his pipes and they weren't in tune for whatever reason. It was like a cold night. And so he just retuned his pipes during the high A of Amazing Grace. I was like, wow, cool. What a musician. The music never stopped. It's just during the high A, he just got the drones in tune. And of course, it's possible, but here he is in front of like hundreds of people. Pipes were out. And it was one of those classic Stuart Little moments, but also like, oh yeah, he could just do that. And I've practiced it a few times since, so I can do it now too. Not quite as fluently, but of course you could do that because you're on a big long high A for 5 to 10 seconds. So
it does hold on there for a long time.
Yeah. So he just went ming, 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 and then the tune never skipped a beat. It was great.
There's a kind of famous video of I think it was BB King breaking a string on stage.
Yeah.
And continuing his solo on the other strings while he restrings the guitar.
Oh, yeah.
Which just blows my mind. And this is just Stuart Little doing the same thing on bagpipes. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. There's one of Harry Connick Jr. that comes to mind. Have you seen the YouTube video of him where the audience is kind of like trying to clap along, but they get off?
Yeah.
But he just adds a beat to one of the bars.
To reset it, yeah.
Yeah, to reset
All of a sudden it's groovy again.
Yeah, and no one even noticed. But it just must be a trick. It must be a trick he has up his sleeve. But anyway, that flexibility, that musicality, that's the real thing that we're trying to build. And the way you get that is through variance. Right? You don't get that by practicing the same thing over and over again. It's obviously true in so many other areas of life. It's like, how do you get great at baking amazing cookies? Well, it probably helps to have baked a whole lot of stuff. And then you have a lot of experience with baking. And then sure enough, your cookies are also great. And by the way, it also benefits you. It also holds your interest on baking so you can continue to get better at it because you're not just making chocolate chip cookies every single time you bake. Have you ever made something so often you get sick of it?
Yeah. And it's weird because usually the reason I started making that thing so often is because I really liked it. And so it's weird to like have it pale for me.
Probably one of the things that sours you on it is that even though you've made chocolate chip cookies 100 times, if that's all you've ever made, they're probably still not as good as the ones that you love from the grocery store.
I'm really good at making chocolate chip cookies.
Is that all? That's your one trick?
No, honestly, it is my one trick, but my kids are really sweet, but also definitely prefer the ones from the grocery store.
Yeah.
So they're always
Okay,
like, oh,
good.
yay, you made them, not bought them. Okay.
Yeah. I feel like you get a lot of that in the bagpipe world too. It's, wow, you're such a great bagpiper, even though we would prefer literally any other music right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Supportive and loving family members. Oh, good. He brought his bagpipes.
Yeah. And then just going back to working out briefly, right? It's not just about how strong you are. It's also about how fast you are. And it's how fast can you run? How much can you lift? How coordinated are you? That's a big part. How many people end up dying after falling as an older person? It's like you don't have the balance and the coordination anymore. And so you're not able to catch yourself when you stumble, then you fall, you break something, and then pretty soon you're dead. I mean, a lot of people pass away that way, which is sad. But I think the idea, I don't know, maybe it's all just mumbo jumbo, but the idea is I'd like to be fit and healthy and strong.
My neighbor across the street is a track coach, and he's told me before that his fitness goal, and he's quite the fit person, runs a lot, swims a lot, bikes, everything.
Yeah.
But he said his fitness goal.
That sounds like Variance, Jim.
Yeah, he varies all the time. Yeah. But he said his one big overriding goal is to always for his whole life be able to get off the toilet and cleaned up all by himself. That's what he's shooting for.
And I'm sure he's saying that in a humorous way, but it's also like pretty real.
It stuck with me. I was like, oh man, that's a good goal.
Well, it's not hard to figure out. So for me, it's like as you get older and you're not going out and playing basketball with the guys as much, and you're starting a business and a family and whatever, and it's not hard to figure out where it's headed, right? And so, yeah, it's like, man, 6-pack would be nice. One of these days, Jim.
Yeah. This is 2025 is my year for a 6-pack.
It's happening. This is the year. It's not so much that. I mean, that would be cool. But it's kind of like you want to feel good. And I want to make it past 65. That's my goal. Make it past 65, maybe to 80 or something without any super debilitating physical or medical issues. That would be really nice.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. Especially when you have kids too, right? Like for me, I started working out very shortly after we had our first because like, man, it would sure be cool to like hang out with your kids and stuff later.
Yeah. And not to mention having to have them take care of you. I mean, it happens, but you want to give yourself the best chance possible against it.
Yeah. And there's never any guarantees too. There you go. But bring that to bagpiping, man.
Now let's turn it into bagpiping.
There's never any guarantee. There's the segue. This is why people tune in.
Yeah.
But there's never any guarantee that the tune that you want to play is going to come out great, Jim.
But you can give yourself the best chance possible. By doing a few things, including varying your material.
Well, and then variance is like one of the key ingredients. So back on topic.
Yeah.
Jim, I think you have a prompt there ready for me. Something along the lines of,
well,
when's the last time you learned a new tune?
You're right. I do have that prompt ready for you, highlighted in yellow right here.
Yeah.
This is from the course, from the Dojo course. These questions are posed. When was the last time you learned a new tune? Like actually sat down with brand new material and started working your way through it.
Yep. And then it's also a question for pipe bands as well. Like where I get the most pushback is people are like, so we're thinking about adding a new tune to our medley this year. And when you come down and work with us, we'd like you to help us on that new tune. And the first thing I always say is, you should be learning all new tunes in your medley this year.
Yeah, I've done that in pipe bands before. I've made that decision before. I'll own up to it that, you know what, we're just going to change out the march. Make it easy.
Yep. And that's a tragedy. The idea is like, well, people don't have that much time, Andrew. And wow, they'll mutiny if we ask them to learn all new tunes. And that's sad. It's sad that your group would mutiny at the opportunity to learn some new tunes. And I think a lot of people are intimidated and a lot of people are under the belief that it takes a long time to learn new tunes and so on and so forth. Will it be a challenge? Yeah, probably. Am I drawing too hard a line? Possibly. But how about at least half? At least half of your competitive repertoire should be brand new each year. How about that? Compromise.
Seems
at least
like
half.
Compromise, yeah.
At least half. Because new stuff is how you get better. So sure, will it be harder? Yes, but don't you want your band to get better? Your band's not going to get better switching out the jig in the middle.
But it also seems like it'll only be harder for a little bit. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm thinking of a really close friend who was a really good bagpiper, and how when we were in high school, he got to where he was so fluent at reading music, and so, I guess fluent is also the word for the dexterity of his fingers. Like the translation of what was on the page to what his fingers would do was such a direct thing that this guy would consume books of tunes like I would read books in
Yeah,
the English language. Like
sure.
he would sit down after school and work and just flip his way through an entire tune book. And that's what he did. And, some favorites he'd kind of pick out and work on a little more later. But it was an amazing skill set. And this is the best bagpiper I've ever personally known. And that was part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think one of the other challenges is it's tough to just dump it all on you at one time.
Mm.
So another thing that seems pretty obvious to me is that my competition material next year might be some tunes that I'm horsing around with this year, even though I have no intention of refining them at this point.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So they might be some of those books that I found and when I was going through a tune book, God forbid, just for fun. Possibly because my current refined repertoire is kind of boring and not that interesting. Yeah, I'm going to be exposed to some different tunes. Maybe I'm listening to some different recordings and I'm getting to know this music. So then in the new season, when suddenly we have this new big list of stuff, maybe it's stuff I've seen before, right? And so it's not like I'm starting from absolute zero when I'm
Yeah,
learning
you've
the
got
tunes.
some familiarity with
Yeah,
everything.
that sounds like maybe a little bit closer to reality. And then the other thing too is at a certain point you know most of the tunes. At least
Hmm.
kind of in your psyche, it's sort of
What?
there.
Yeah, we talked through when we did that episode where we composed a tune on air. I feel like that was a good example of how there's an underlying structure to bagpipe
Yes.
music. Maybe there are
Amen,
a few
Jim.
different options for structures, but naturally, if you go through a lot of tunes, even just for fun, just to look at them, not necessarily perfecting them, you're going to increasingly become familiar with what's the word? Is the word idiom? You're going to become familiar with the way things usually go. It's like, well, from here,
Yeah.
it's usually going to go one way or another. And yeah, you'll increase sort of your familiarity with all of it in
Yeah,
that
that's
way.
sort of using idiom in the normal sense of the word, yeah.
Mm.
So as opposed to the bagpipe sense of the word, where the bagpipe word idiom just means, is it a march? Is it a jig? Is it a
Right.
slower?
Yes.
Those are idioms.
Yeah.
But I think in the more global sense of the word, idiom means these sort of mannerisms and they're like inexplicit things. It's hard to put your finger on what it is,
Yeah, it's
but
like part of the flavor.
yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like how bagpipers do things.
Yeah.
And how does the grace note system work? Man, the bagpipe tunes follow a depressingly narrow array
Mhm.
of different chord progressions as well, and a depressingly narrow array of different rhythms as well. But the possibilities are still endless. It's kind of like chess, where the pieces can only move a couple of different ways, but there's more potential variance of a chess game than there are atoms in the universe or something.
Yeah, here we are thousands of years into playing chess as humans, and it's still fun. So
Yeah.
there you
Yeah,
go.
exactly. And it challenges us and it's interesting and
Yeah.
I don't know, and it's evocative. But anyway,
Have you ever sat down with a tune book, Andrew? That I'm thinking of a few that come to my mind are like some from Barry Shears, Matt Seattle, or Timothy Cummings that have a lot of tunes, but it's like every page, like the top half or bottom half or the opposite page, also has background about the tune or
yeah.
information about a version of it or something like that, and find
hmm
yourself just like really enjoying play a little, read a little, play a little, read a little, and the time flies.
I mean, I would probably skip all the reading and just play the tune.
Yeah, you're a purist.
Well, no, or the opposite or something, or just impatient. But yes, yeah, for sure.
I've found myself in that situation a few times. I'd like to be there more because I feel like what was going on there was like an attitude of I'm enjoying this. This is
Yeah.
nice. And I
hmm
feel like that's what gets in the way for me sometimes with this idea of very material is I go, "Oh, well, if I need to learn 12 songs instead of one song, then I need to learn them as if I'm going to compete with each one of them." You know what I mean? Get it down
Yeah.
perfectly. I think
Yes.
that's part of what's going on in my head when I feel resistance to this idea.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like a weird, twisted, ironic offshoot of what bagpiping is really supposed to be, right?
Mm.
It's supposed to be this thing that we do for fun
Hmm.
and we do to hang out with our buddies. And so therefore any tune that floats by, we should be curious about, we should be fascinated about, and we should be like, ooh, let's try that. And even like, ooh, let's take out some of the embellishments so we can have a crack at that.
Yeah.
Right? Like all of these should be totally natural things. But like, and is it just in a North American? Is it more of a North American thing or is it everywhere? Not quite sure. But instead we have like this aversion to anything that might distract us from the tunes that
Yeah.
we play. We play, these are the tunes we play.
Yeah, you
And
mention it in that course. You say, do you balk at, in quotes, wasting time
yeah.
looking at other tunes?
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It is
I get
crazy.
it, right? Every now and then it's go time. Every now and then it's got to be like, okay, I'm on a deadline here and I just need to do reps of my stuff today because I got a competition coming up in 3 days. To me, that makes sense. It's kind of like your last minute preparations for the big exam, but those moments are pretty exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
And if they're not exceedingly rare, you need to check yourself.
Mm.
Like how many really important performances are there in a given year? There shouldn't be that many. There should be a small handful of really important ones. And then there's other ones that are like not unimportant, but it's not something where you should have to study for the test. You catch
Sure,
what I'm-
yeah.
You catch what
Plenty
I'm
of
saying?
gigs come up where you want to make sure you're like in shape, your bagpipes are tight and stuff, but you already know the material, so.
Yeah, and if you make a mistake, it's not like life or death.
Right. Yeah.
There shouldn't be that. There shouldn't be that many where you
Live in a
risk.
stressful, I'm the giggingest, competingest piper in the world.
If I make a single mistake in front of this large group of people who doesn't, wouldn't know if
Yeah.
I was playing an entirely different instrument.
Yeah.
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't really be like that. So there might be rare occasions where you need to cram for the test. But other than that, I mean, we should be playing for enjoyment and fun and variance, right?
You bring up an example that fits really well right here in the course where you say, imagine if you were illiterate and you were learning to read and you decided you were only going to read a few books and they were going to be about this narrow subject matter. And the example uses just cats. You're just going to read books about cats. And here we might say, well, what if you were a biology student and you had a class, a test coming up that was about cats? Well, in that situation, go ahead and read books just about cats.
You could specialize in cats.
You
right?
could. Cats are cool.
Picture the world's greatest cat expert for a moment.
I am.
Right?
I am picturing them.
Oh, okay, good. Picture the world's greatest expert in cats for a moment, right? And then now picture them with absolutely no knowledge of dogs. Is that realistic?
It's not realistic.
This is the world's leading expert on cats, but they know nothing about dogs other than that they have fur and they bark. But that's it.
Right.
You know what I mean? They have our understanding of dogs.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
That's not realistic at all, is it?
Not at all. The foremost expert about cats would at least know a lot about like mammals, probably know a lot about other things
There you
too.
go. Because cats are like, they are unique, but they come from a group. And then everything you know about that group is pretty helpful. And then like, you're also probably going to know about fish. Now, you have a specialization, which is cats, right? But you have a general understanding of a lot of animals in order to really understand your specialization. By the way, there's a real world bagpiping application of this.
Yeah.
Have you ever met the guy? And as a judge, I meet a lot of these, and they're not all guys and gals that clearly specialize in P-Brock, and that's what they love to do. So they'll show up in grade 3 or grade 2 or something, and they'll play a pretty good P-Brock for you. But then later in the day, they'll come up and they'll play light music for you, and it's at a way, way, way lower standard. And what I find fascinating about that is, okay, so clearly this person loves P-Brock, and I'm picturing them loving the story behind it. But a lot of the finger work in P-Brock, especially earlier on in the tune, is not as difficult as light music finger work. And so maybe they're just able to do that more easily, and so they just enjoy it more. But then ironically, they're not a great P-Brock player. Like, they're decent, but they're not great. But they're not great not because they haven't specialized enough at P-Brock. It's because they don't have a broad enough skill set, right? What'll happen is they'll play a really nice front half of the tune and then a really poor back half of the tune where better finger control and more rhythmic control is necessary towards the back half. And then you're like, wow, okay, so this person is much better P-Brock player than light music player, but ironically still not a great P-Brock player because they haven't spent enough time on their light music. That sort of thought crosses my mind.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you cannot be, I've never met one. I've never met a great, and by great, I mean with a capital G, like great. Like, I've met many good P-Brock players that are not good light music players also, but I've never met a great pibroch player that isn't also great at light music.
Hmm.
It's like further evidence that variance and not just blind specialization is like the route to the goal. And a lot of people miss that.
I do not know for certain the truthfulness or like the reality behind this expanded quote that I'm sure people have seen. It's been memeified and floats around the internet like crazy, where the jack of all trades, master of none saying is expanded to include, but better to be jack of all trades than master of one or something like that.
Mm.
I don't know for sure I don't know where that quote comes from. Is that Shakespeare? I don't know.
I don't know.
But that I wonder if if that idea, wherever it's rooted, is applicable here.
Sort of ironic, right?
Yeah, that comes to mind kind of partly because I do remember when I was a kid and being told, and this is maybe it's because it feels validating to me somehow. I floated around instruments a lot and really enjoyed it a lot, but I was told by a few instructors like you need to focus on something, like
Yeah.
pick one, or you're just going to end up a jack of all trades. And I still feel resistant to that idea because I do feel like no, like like the idea of music is more present to me because of having hopped around. I would like to think. Though, to be fair, I play music with other people who have focused specifically on an instrument and they're very proficient on that instrument. So I can see that I'm sure there's a healthy way to do different things.
Do you want proficiency? Jim, do you want proficiency? Now I'm reminded of another quote from one of the Star Wars movies
Oh, yeah.
where some guy from the Emperor was explaining to somebody, one of the good guys, how like people say they want freedom, but what they really want is security. So you could be really proficient on an instrument, but do you have freedom to express yourself and explore and do the interesting things that you want to do? Because that's what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in proficiency. I mean, you can see a lot of bagpipers who are quote unquote proficient, but there's not that many other places they're going to be able to go with that specific, highly specialized skill set.
Well, as long as we're hopping quotes,
For example, is anyone going to hire you as the dessert pastry chef type person at their restaurant?
they would regret it.
I mean, you make a darn good chocolate chip cookie. You
I
are
would say I do.
proficient.
Yeah,
You are
absolutely.
proficient with a chocolate chip cookie, but you don't really have freedom to bake.
I have no idea how to make like tiramisu. What is that made of? I don't know
point.
what that fluffy stuff is.
Exactly. So you might even have chocolate chip cookies. By the way, that's what the show Beating Bobby Flay is all about. Have you ever seen that show?
That's not the chess movie, is it?
No, Beating Bobby Flay, or I forget what it's called exactly, but it's Bobby Flay, the chef. So like specialists are invited to put their dish and I don't know what it would be. It would be like shrimp and grits. Like I'm the master at shrimp and grits. And then they would challenge Bobby Flay to make a better shrimp and grits than them. But that show is all about Bobby Flay's freedom to create any dish.
Bobby Flay being like a master generalist, he can like hop around.
That's the idea. That's the idea. And it's really kind of interesting. And of course, I think, and I mean, maybe a real chef would be like, Bobby Flay's crappy. It's not that great. And it's all just for show. And so maybe that's true. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what makes him great though, is that he can do it all to a very high degree. And I'm sure he has dishes that he specializes in. I'm sure he has areas that he's applied focus over the years. But ironically, you can't be a master of anything without being also a jack of most things.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wonder if that's maybe kind of the mentality shift that we need if this is a challenge for us in our bagpiping, that like we might feel like, well, I'm going to focus on pibroch or I'm going to focus on MSR or whatever it is and be like, well, I want to be a master of that thing. And if I spend my time on jigs and reels, then I become this jack of all trades within the bagpiping sphere. But paradoxically, if I focused on all of it, then any one part of it that I wanted to focus in on for the competition or a performance or an album or whatever it is would probably come out better actually.
Yeah.
For having varied my material.
Yes, exactly. I think people have a false idea. It happens at some point in the development, right? I think it's probably just around the time you realize, oh man, to do this for real, it's going to take a long time. So why don't I just snatch at something that's going to be like my thing and see if I can own that thing? And I feel like in the bagpipe world, it's maybe easier to take a stab at that, or it seems easier than other things. Like it seems like if I just focus on pibroch, I'll get that thing. But you can't, right? The only way out is through. The good news is through is a lot of fun, but you do have to adjust what your expectations are.
Yeah, maybe settle into that attitude of this is a journey and I'm going to enjoy it rather
Yeah.
than.
And that's really the only way.
I have a friend, I don't think I mentioned him before on the show here, who's a diesel truck racing enthusiast.
Nice.
And he was asking me about bagpipes. He was like, I've been thinking, want some music in my life, think maybe I want to learn to play bagpipes. And so he was asking me for advice and stuff. And I was telling him, basically what I told him was treat it like you treat diesel trucks. Because I know how he treats diesel trucks, which is,
How does he do it?
for him, it is just he loves the process. Like eternal tuning up and tweaking is what he loves about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, treat it like that and it'll enrich your life.
Do you think he's only ever opened the hood of a diesel truck? Or do you think he's had a look? Do you think he's had a look at other kinds of trucks?
He's had a look at lawnmowers and food processors too, like anything that's a motor. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it seems obvious, right?
Yeah.
Andrew, that was a stupid question. Aha. But it's not, because what pipers will do is they'll say, well, these are the three that our band is going to compete with. So these are the three tunes that I play. And how dare you suggest that we learn another set? Are we going to compete with that set? Then no.
Why?
Then no. I don't see why we would do that. No, just to focus on the competition set. We didn't get it perfect last year. We didn't win.
So we're going to do it again.
So we're going to do this set again. But you kind of laugh, but that's what we do. It's like, oh, we didn't really perfect the set last year. Look, if a year isn't enough to perfect it, 2 years isn't going to be enough either. By the way, I can't name a band that's ever perfected a set. Nope. It's not a thing, right? So you can get to the point where you play it really well, but you're never going to perfect it. It's not a thing. People need to get over this idea. Yeah.
When you bring up the example of learning to read the English language or whatever your spoken language is, and you suggest like, what if you only read a certain number of books and they were all about cats?
Learning to read, by the way, it's such a great example. Sorry to interrupt. Hold that
No, go
thought
ahead.
one
Yeah.
more time for me, Jim.
Yeah. No
What's
worries.
so interesting about learning to read is that 100 years ago, a very small percentage, and maybe let's go 150, but 150 years ago, only a very small percentage of the populations in the Western world were literate. Like most people were not able to read. So this is not something that you can argue is like genetically built in. Like sometimes I use the example of learning to walk for different things, and the argument might be, well, it's genetically built in for humans to eventually learn how to walk.
Sure.
And there might be an argument for that. I'm not an expert in those matters, but reading is definitely different.
A recent enough event within the species' development, right?
Exactly. And at some point, a decision was made by the collective, for lack of a better word, that like, wait a minute, there's no excuse for everyone not to be able to read to a basic level. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons Scotland was so successful and played such a huge role, is that they had a pretty intense Reformation in Scotland, I think. And educating everybody about how to read became a huge thing. And so Scotland was way ahead education-wise of other European countries. And we owe a lot of the stuff that we're doing today to like innovations that the Scots produced.
It sounds to me like someone's been reading how the Scottish invented everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, definitely. It's been along the things. It's really interesting. But anyway, I digress. My point is, at some point, it became obvious, oh, everyone should just learn how to read. Imagine
Cool
that.
would be.
And then it went from very few people being literate to now, in modern society, very few people are illiterate.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's actually bananas if you think about it. Anyway, Jim, carry on. How do we learn to read?
Oh, so by varying material, basically, is the point, to hop right to it. You suggest that, like, if we kept our material to exclusively these few books and they're all about cats, you suggested, like, at the end of a learning period, you would have a lot of words memorized specifically about cats. You'd have some words that are generally useful. But what you kind of pull out of this is you don't learn to read by memorizing specific words. That's not the idea. The idea is vary your material enough that you reach a point where you could read anything. Yeah. That's the idea, right?
Yeah, and memorization probably isn't the right thing, but you learn about all the associations. And yeah, you do remember. I know what the word cat means. I have that memorized in my mind. I have a picture of that. So there is some memorization involved, but it's not memorization of sequences. Right? You're memorizing and internalizing how it actually works.
And I can imagine how this could play out if I said, okay, I'm going to learn to play bagpipes, but only common marches.
Yes.
That's fine. But what would happen is maybe I'd get really good at, I'm trying to think of a solid example, but let's say like C doublings, but only the way that they appear in Scotland the Brave.
Yes.
So then if I encountered a C doubling in any other context, I wouldn't have the flexibility to like work with it, right? I would
Yep.
only have learned it as part of a sequence, which is the sequence of Scotland the Brave.
Correct. And Scotland the Brave contains a whole lot of errors.
Errors. Interesting. So it's
and-
one
and-
translation of a tune that's
Well,
got weird stuff going
No,
on.
nothing like that. But Scotland the Brave has a whole lot of errors. So maybe that's not the right way of putting it. Let's just say we learned one tune our whole life, and it was Scotland the Brave. You would learn erroneous things. Is erroneous the word?
I think so. I think, yeah.
Yeah, you would have an error-filled understanding of what bagpiping is if all you ever did was play Scotland the Brave. So for you, the tune is a great tune, okay, but it's filled with errors for you. So you would say, all tunes start on low A, for example.
Yeah,
if all you ever learned
obviously
was
a
Scotland the
problem
Brave,
there, yeah.
and by the way, we could expand it to 2 tunes, Scotland the Brave and Amazing Grace, and you might think to yourself, all tunes start on low A.
Yeah, I now have a sampling of multiple tunes and I see it's consistent across the board.
But is that true? Do all tunes start on low A? No, but
Definitely
you would
not.
never know that unless you expanded your horizons, right? So your understanding of music is filled with errors if you only learn one tune, right? And so the way that we correct errors and move closer to the truth and move closer to what good bagpiping is, and perhaps more importantly to this discussion, how I'm going to do that, is you have to eliminate those errors. And so the way you eliminate those errors is by expanding the sample size and picking up on things, right? It's also how you learn the grace note system. Most people don't learn it from Andrew Douglas at the Dojo telling them how it works. You learn that over time as you play more and more and more and more and more tunes. And then you realize, there's a pattern here. There's a system going on here. Like G grace notes.
By exposure to it.
Yeah, G grace notes tend to happen on the beat. And for most people, it's an inexplicit skill that they learn. So that you're not identifying it with words and analyzing it. That's my job, right? Guy that does bagpipes for a living. But most of us learn to just kind of feel what that is. It's like the more you read Shakespeare, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
Is my understanding. And I've read very
So
little.
they say. Yeah.
So they say. But it would make total sense, right? And you probably can't exactly put your finger on what it is.
Yeah.
But like you kind of learn to understand it and you learn to understand the flow. Reading the Bible is the same, right? If you just pick up a Bible and you try to read it, it's like tricky. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you hang out at your church every Sunday and you practice reading the Bible every Sunday, but eventually it gets pretty easy. And you start to see like how it all works. And again, what makes it easier? Probably exposure to the wide, wait for it, variety of biblical passages and stuff that you become familiar with. I use that example because it's come up a couple of times in conversation, but also that's how it works.
We are talking about commandments after all.
Yes, indeed. We couldn't. We're not God though. We couldn't narrow it down to just 10.
Right. Yeah. Not quite that good. You do have an excellent little turn of phrase here toward the end of the text for this section of the course, though, that I really like. I feel like it kind of puts it all in a neat little package. You say, our weaknesses lie on the margins of our comfort zone.
Yes.
Widen that zone. Oh, go ahead.
I actually borrowed that from the creator of CrossFit. Who's
really?
Greg Glassman. He's kind of a bad boy. He's kind of been canceled, but maybe rightfully so. And he might be a little bit of a, how do I put this on a PG podcast? Might be a little bit of a not nice guy. But
I see. When you said a little bit of a bad boy at first, I thought you meant like in a cool way. So I was going to say just like you and me. But now I'm going to say no, not like you and me at all. Nope, not that kind of bad boy.
But I digress. But yeah, so something he famously said is your weaknesses lie on the edge of your comfort zone. Yeah. Not inside it. And by the way, not outside it either. It lies on the margins.
Yeah. And so then you say widen that zone.
Yeah.
By exploring a wide array of tunes and styles instead of a narrow array. And you'll begin to limit your musical weaknesses.
Yes.
Instead of feeling limited by your weaknesses. I like that a lot.
But it's also exactly correct and is perfectly obvious, right?
Yeah. And you do mention, too, in the course that this is not unlike immersion, but it's more active.
Yeah, exactly. Immersion is variance, but it's it's passive.
Yeah.
But it's all related. Yeah, of course. It's definitely all related. Hey, before we accidentally end this, can we talk about some practical ways to implement variance?
That's a really good idea. Yeah, the practical nuts and bolts of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, this is stream of consciousness. I don't have anything prepared, but we do this thing at the dojo called the Tune of the Week. We even have a little book that we send out to our members. And it has, as you could imagine, approximately 52 tunes in here.
Nice.
Tunes of the week. And we curate them ahead of time. And we do them all synchronized at the dojo. So every week we release a new tune of the week. And you're welcome to participate in that. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think even if you're not a member, I might be lying about this, Jen. I might be lying about this. But
You're
I
about
think
to enact a new company policy all of a sudden.
certainly it used to be the case that you could get access to the tune of the week without being a member. I'm not actually sure that's true anymore.
Well, I can tell you that without being a member, you can kind of glean what the tune is just from the chatter on the internet. So you can at least kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah. So anyway, here's practical tip number 1. Learn a miscellaneous brand spanking new tune every week. And by learn, I don't mean memorize it, and I don't mean get it to competition ready. I just mean open up the book, find a recording of it would be really helpful as well. Remember all those tips we talked about recently in that, what was it? Oh, your stack of tunes and stuff.
Stack of tunes.
The stack of tunes episode. Remember all that stuff we talked about because it's really important. But like have a guest performer each week in your stack of tunes, right? Just a brand spanking new, fresh tune that you have no intentions about. You're just going to get to know it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like saying, go meet a random stranger once a week, right? Same with the tunes, and then vary it as much as possible. So if you did a march this week as your special guest tune, do a stress bay next week, and then do a jig. Even if you're a beginner, see what you can make of a jig. And what you might find, which happens to be true, is that jigs are really easy. If you simplify it and slow the tempo down, jigs are easier than most other tunes. And even that knowledge would go a long way and make you a better player. And you never know what you're going to learn from a tune. Or you might pick up something like, oh yeah, Shots and Dykehead are playing that tune on this YouTube video I'm watching, and they had this amazing harmony, which sounds like it's just a C that's played long underneath it. It's like, cool. Can I play a long C under some of my tunes? And suddenly you're like a better player, and you're more interesting, and you're more free.
Yeah, you're kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit.
Yeah, and then at the end of the week, throw that tune out and go on to the next one. And by throw it out, I don't mean forever. I just mean for now. And what you might find is next off season, you'll now have a list of 50 tunes that you developed a little bit of familiarity with that you can pick from to make an educated choice about what the tunes that you're going to take seriously are going to be for the upcoming year. This is sort of how it works. So do one tune a week. Just pick one. Flip to a random spot in the Scots Guards book or whatever and let her rip. Alternatively, you could do it with us at the dojo, or another cool option would be to do it with your band. So if you're a pipe major or leader of a band, okay, I get it. You got your competition set that cannot be changed for 5 years at a time. Got it, bro. But how about one guest tune each week? And then at each band practice, spend 15 minutes of the band practice playing the new tune of the week. And you might be saying, well, that's a waste of band practice time, Andrew. Well, we already explained that it's not. But here's a way to make it even more not a waste of time.
Even more not.
Yeah, so you take the tune of the week. Let's say it's a 4/4 march. It's a miscellaneous tune of the week that you're not that serious about. Spend 15 minutes on that, and then immediately go to a 4/4 march in your own repertoire. See if by working on the random tune, the miscellaneous 4/4 march doesn't instantly sound better. And I'll give you a little hint. It'll sound instantly better, at least for that moment in time. Because even in a small amount, the variance really counts. You want to hear some more practical variance tips?
I do, yeah.
Here's one I kind of screwed up when I played in the silver medal in 2017. In retrospect, I realized I kind of screwed it up. Vary where you practice.
Oh?
Yep, variance. So don't just practice in your practice room all the time. Go out to the park and practice, and go out when it's a little bit too cold for comfort and practice, and go out when it's a little too hot, and sometimes play in the shade and sometimes play in the sun. And maybe most of the time you're in your practice room. But if you can vary where you practice and the environment, that'll make you a better technician on your instrument and your instrument setup. And you'll kind of learn like, oh, my pipes behave pretty wacky in the sun, so maybe we want to avoid that. Or if I know I'm going to be competing in the sun, maybe I better think about that. So vary where you practice.
I see wisdom in that. I've kind of been forced in a way to do that just from playing a lot of funerals. You end up playing them in the winter and in the summer and stuff like that. And so I've had to do some pretty bad jobs to realize how my bagpipes behave in these different situations.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm an excellent technician now, but I do have a few tricks where I can go, okay, it's getting colder. I know what I need to do to, kind of.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I found that out in front of people who were mourning the loss of a loved one instead of by myself at the park. It would have been better by myself at the park.
Yeah. It's always great to send someone off to eternity knowing that you did a poor musical job. Yeah. It's actually pretty rough, Yeah, you got to take that seriously. So like weddings are different. I mean, there's only a 50% chance they're going to stay married anyway. No,
I thought you were going to say because most of them are drunk, so they won't remember.
Well,
but, you're right.
That too.
The divorce rate's pretty high. So
and by the way, I'm kidding. By the way, I'm just kidding. I didn't mean that. Want to hear another tip?
Yeah.
Always play at different tempos.
Oh.
It's another tip. Ever have a tune where you have the tempo that you play it at, but if you change the tempo even slightly, it feels all gross and disgusting and it doesn't come out good and you have a whole bunch of problems with it?
Yes, it's really disheartening when even if I'm just slowing down a tune, suddenly my embellishments fall apart. It's like, this should be easier.
Yeah. And by the way, maybe you have a band and the goal tempo for the march is 80. So you always practice at 80. So I'm not saying don't practice at 80, but what if you take 80 and then you do plus or minus 5 beats per minute, let's say, and just roll a dice. Or you could even just roll a dice would be kind of cool. Mm-hmm. If you had a dice or you did a random number generator, but dice are kind of interesting in the sense that, let's say 1, 2, or 3 is negative. So if you roll a 1, it's -1. If you roll a 2, it's -2. So what you take from the usual tempo, you subtract 2. And then 4, 5, and 6 is 1 up, 2 up, or 3 up. Right. So you just roll the dice and it's like, cool, that's my tempo for today. So now you're getting comfortable with the tune and you're learning the ins and outs of the tune with some flexibility in the tempo. So if things change, like anybody here ever play faster than usual when you're actually at the performance?
Every time. Yes.
Right. So if you practice at 80, you know for a fact the performance tempo is going to be higher than that. So what if that wasn't like something you've never done before? And you have the confidence and you can do it, that would be a big thing. So vary the tempo that you play things at as well. What other things can you vary? Vary the strength of chanter reed that you play on would be a good one.
That makes sense.
Yep, there's things you can learn from all different sorts of ones. Vary the drone reeds that you play. Maybe not the week before the competition, but from time to time. Vary the pipe bags you play. What are some other ones? Ooh, I have another one. Vary the intensity that you are applying to your approach. Like vary how hard on yourself you are.
Oh, yeah. Give yourself a break sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Or sometimes really just play for fun and throw all caution to the wind and don't practice at all and just eat that dessert. And you know what I mean? Just have pie for dinner.
Yeah.
And then sometimes play with tons of focus and be a little bit tough on yourself, but mix that kind of stuff up as well. Because you can't just be like, you can't just flagellate yourself. Is that the right word, Jim?
Yes, flatulation. Yeah.
Flatulation? No, that means farting.
No, not ch. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, but yeah, don't just be ruthless with yourself all the time. That's not going to work either.
Also, don't just fart all the time.
Don't just fart all the time.
You have to sometimes. Don't
yes.
do it all the time.
Sometimes, yes. But all the time, no.
I think I just got our episode intro. But something I tried, I think it was just last year, I felt frustrated that I still feel kind of frustrated. Like sometimes I feel like I'm doing better at it now, but I felt frustrated that I had such a hard time knowing if my drones were in or out. I felt like I could get my drones to tune to each other, but knowing if they were linked in with the chanter well, I just felt like I was deaf to it. I wasn't picking up on it. So I just corked 2 drones. And I just played with 1 drone for a week, and then with 2 for a week, and then with 3 for a week. And it was really fun.
Yeah.
And like all these familiar tunes that I already knew felt different against a different backdrop. It I don't know, it made playing, it added something special to playing for a while. It was fun.
Totally. So vary your tuning methods. That's a great idea, right? And there's other ones, like another practical application of that is sometimes I have trouble locking my drones in. I think it's a normal thing. Like you just sort of become deaf to it and you're like, man, what am I even trying to do again? And you just kind of get lost.
Yeah.
So just change it up. And maybe you change it up even if you don't need to and you just do it because it's nice to have proficiency. But like solo pipers, there's sort of like 2 things that you'll see. You'll see pipers tune up with all 3 drones going, but then you'll often see top pipers turn off the middle tenor and get the tenor and the bass together first, and then turn on the middle one after that. You'll often see that. I like to practice both of those things and mix it up because, yeah, sometimes I can't quite nail it when I've got all three drones going. And so it's nice to be able to have that other method at my disposal. And sometimes even when I think my drones are locked, I'll turn off the middle one and realize, ooh, I think I could get the bass even a little bit closer. And then you're like, oh, wow, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Vary the stakes, vary the pressure.
Oh, yeah, that
when
makes
you
sense.
play as well. Yeah. So play in front of people sometimes, but not all the time. But sometimes get some people in front of you because it changes the experience. And then we get better at that. Like, for example, talking about correcting errors, right? So here's an error. I get the tune, I'm practicing in my practice room. I get this tune sounding great. And you think to yourself, here's something you think. I got this tune down, which is actually completely an error statement. Wrong. And here's how you find out that you're actually incorrect about the fact that you now know the tune. Is now when you go play in front of a group of people, you don't know the tune anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one for me is I get my band tunes going, everything's going great, but then you sit down with your peers and you're nervous and things aren't as good as you remember them and things are kind of tight.
Yeah.
I had an embarrassing old man Douglas moment last season with that. I was playing Boba Fett Karen. I thought I was nailing it. I thought I was the man. And then Stuart had us play around the table a couple of little bits. And like, yep, I was the problem. And well, maybe not the only one, but yep, whoops, not so good.
Did you
now?
realize it by listening to other people before it came to your turn?
Totally didn't realize it.
No,
I had an error. There was error baked into my overall thought process, and it's fine. And then you go home and you work on it, right? It seems sometimes counterintuitive, but you want to know the areas that you're insufficient because those are where the opportunities are. You never love getting negative feedback, but that's ironic because the negative feedback is what's going to move you forward.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what do you learn from somebody just saying, wow, you're great?
I learned something about how much I need validation from others because I don't have a secure sense of self.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to that, right? I feel like relationships are like that. It's like, man, sometimes you have friends that, this is more when I was younger, but you realize, oh, that friend just likes everything about me. And then those relationships don't tend to last, do they?
There's some amount of
calling you on your
needed.
bull crap that's needed in a good friendship. Yeah. Thoughts? Agree?
My best friends definitely call me on my bullcrap, so that's, that seems consistent.
Yeah, and the one that calls me on my bullcrap the best is my wife, right? Which I think is probably, it's not always my favorite, but it's a key ingredient. And by the way, my kids are starting to do it now too.
Oh, good. Well, that means that they'll be your best friends too.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. But anyway, there you go. A couple thoughts about variance, Jim. You got to do it.
Yeah.
Be variant.
Be variant.
Hey everybody, Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo, and I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.